You're being watched, not with admiration, not with malice, but with confusion carved into the expression of those who once believed they had you figured out. They're squinting at your evolution, trying to decipher the blueprint of your ascent. The problem? You didn't broadcast the process. You didn't narrate every wound. You didn't explain your healing, and now they sit back watching you move in silence, sculpting a new existence brick by brick, bewildered that the person they thought was finished is not only alive, but unfazed and unreachable. It disturbs them, not because you became something new, but because you did it without their permission, their applause, or their understanding. That's the fracture point. That's where your power began. They can't decode it because they weren't present for the breakdown. They watched you bleed and assumed you'd drown. They mistook the stillness in your eyes for surrender, not knowing you were downloading a new language, reprogramming your thresholds, and storing ammunition for the version of you they now see but can't explain. You exist now in a reality beyond the framework of their perception. You are no longer operating within the scripts they rehearsed. You no longer crave their validation. That shift, it terrifies them. Because people who depend on your wounds to feel whole cannot process your wholeness. They watch in silence, hoping you'll crack just a little so they can make sense of it, but you don't. And that silence wraps around them like a verdict. Your energy no longer leaks. That's what they notice first. You used to overgive, over-explain, over-love. You poured from a well poisoned by performance. But now your energy is clean, contained, and curated. You no longer bleed in places where healing is mocked. You no longer explain things to ears designed to misunderstand. And because of this, they keep watching, waiting for a sign, any sign, that you're still tethered to the reality they assign you. But you're not. You've detached, floated above their noise, created an ecosystem fueled by self-respect, and in that ecosystem their confusion grows. Because what they can't understand, they can't predict. And what they can't predict, they fear. They try to reverse engineer your composure. It must be an act, they whisper. There's no way they're really this calm. But your peace isn't performance, it's discipline. It's the kind of serenity forged through chaos and chosen with intention. And toxic minds don't understand discipline that's self-sourced. They think power only comes from dominance or manipulation. They don't understand power born from release. You let go of the need to be right, the need to be understood, the need to be invited back. You let it all go. And now, they're left watching a force they can't follow. You became abstract to them, too fluid, too free, too unfixed. And people addicted to control can't survive where there are no strings to pull. You've become a myth in their mind, a ghost with a pulse. They create alternate versions of you, trying to match the new glow to old narratives. They must be faking it. They're probably miserable. That's their comfort. That's how they avoid introspection, because if your peace is real, then their chaos is self-inflicted. If your joy is authentic, then their story collapses. So they keep watching, not because they want to celebrate you, but because they're looking for cracks, waiting for a glimpse of the old you, the one they could manipulate, predict, control. But that version, you buried it, gave it a funeral in your own heart, said goodbye with no flowers. Just resolve. Psychologically, the unknown disrupts the fragile ego. You've become an unknown. You used to be a fixed point in their manipulation web, a response they could count on. But now, you're an anomaly. You've stepped outside the algorithm, and it eats at them. Because you didn't announce your growth, you embodied it. And embodiment cannot be argued with. It can't be debated. It simply is. And they're left staring, hoping for a glitch. But you don't glitch anymore. You flow. And when they try to grasp you with old tactics, you slip through their fingers like smoke. You live now in delayed silence. They see your name and pause, scroll through your life and pause, talk about you and pause. That pause is the dissonance between the lie they told about you and the truth they're witnessing unfold, and that gap grows louder each day. You aren't seeking revenge, you aren't seeking closure, you are seeking nothing. And that nothing, it's everything. It's the loudest form of growth. Because to need nothing from the ones who hurt you is the ultimate reclamation. They can't comprehend how someone they thought they destroyed could walk this silently, this steadily, into power. You don't need to be understood anymore. That's what really broke the spell. Because toxic people only have leverage when you need understanding, but you stopped needing it. You became your own witness. You validated your own experience. You wrote your own ending and decided no one else gets to edit the draft. They keep watching, hoping they're still part of the narrative, but they're not. You stripped them of authorship, reclaimed your pen. And now, every time they look your way, they're reminded that the version of you they betrayed still lived and thrived. Your pace, your silence, your detachment, it all unnerves them. Not because you've become cold, but because you've become unreadable. And unreadable people cannot be controlled. They once knew every cue that would draw you back into the chaos. A delayed message, a well-placed insult masked as a joke, a sudden withdrawal of affection. They used to trigger you like a switch, watching you fold, reach, explain, beg. But now you move slowly. You speak rarely. You respond only when it's worth your breath. And that unpredictability is what unsettles them. You no longer orbit their drama. You no longer bleed from the same wounds they once sliced open so easily. Your pace is not out of confusion, it's out of precision. Every step you take is measured. Every silence is loaded. And that control, your ability to not react, exposes theirs as a performance. That's what eats them alive. They assumed you were dependent on them for your identity, that you were stitched together by their attention, their approval, their presence. And when you disappeared from that script, when you stopped showing up to perform the role they assigned you, they panicked. Because they don't know how to function around someone who doesn't need to be understood. You don't chase now. You don't correct their lies. You don't defend your silence with apologies. You let them speak. You let them misunderstand. And that refusal to explain, that unnerves the manipulative mind. Because manipulation feeds off reaction, and you've gone dark. You've gone still. You've become water they can't grasp, a presence they can't mold. That shift, it turned their perceived power into smoke. Your detachment wasn't instant, it was earned, built from years of microcuts you were told to ignore. From being the bigger person in rooms filled with emotional toddlers throwing tantrums masked as conversations. They saw your patience and called it weakness. They saw your compassion and labeled it neediness. They thought your kindness meant dependence. So when you stepped back, when you put space between you and the circus they performed in daily, it hit harder than anything you could have shouted. You didn't announce your exit. You didn't leave the room with fire. You disappeared like air leaving a sealed chamber. And now they're gasping because your absence is suffocating what they thought they controlled. They stalk your peace now. They stare at your slow pace, trying to decode the meaning behind each step. Why are they so calm, they ask. What are they thinking? But that's the art of detachment. It removes access to your mind while leaving your presence intact. You still exist, but you're no longer available. And people who relied on your accessibility, they spiral when those resources are gone. They can't comprehend that you outgrew the chaos, that you no longer find comfort in explaining your soul to the unworthy. Your silence is not passive, it's tactical, and it disturbs them more than rage ever could. They want you loud. They want you unstable. They want to provoke something they can recognize because recognition brings relief to the manipulator. But you deny them that. You deny them closure. You deny them the emotional catharsis of watching you crack. And in that denial, you expose just how much of their identity was built around controlling your reactions. You move slowly now. You speak rarely, but every movement is weighted. You are composed in a way they can't mimic. They try to appear unfazed too, but their forced detachment lacks the soul yours carries. Because yours was earned, Theirs is fake, and they know it. Psychologically, what you've done is disarm their internal system. Manipulators rely on feedback loops to anchor themselves. They need to feel like they matter through chaos. Your calm presence offers no such confirmation. Your detachment offers no reward. You stopped playing the role, you stopped being their mirror, and now they're forced to sit with their own reflection. It's not pretty. That stillness you now inhabit, it forces introspection. And people like them fear introspection like fire. Because inside them is a void they've spent years covering up with noise. And now, in your silence, that void screams. You are no longer responsive to their chaos. You used to flinch when they grow distant. You used to overthink their every cold word, trying to win back warmth. But now, you notice the cold, and you walk into the sun. That evolution, the way you stopped engaging, the way you started choosing peace over proximity, it disturbs them. They can't track you anymore. They can't predict you. And the brain, when it can't predict a pattern, goes into panic. They're panicking. Behind the calm texts, behind the new smiles, behind the fake closure, they are panicking because they know they've lost control. And once a toxic person loses control, they lose relevance. You've become sovereign. That's what your detachment says now. It says, I no longer need to fight to be seen. It says, your version of me holds no power here. It says, I define myself now. And in a world where they defined you by how much they could shake you, that new stance feels like a threat. But it's not a threat. It's a truth. And truth, to someone who lives off illusions, is the deepest violence. Your silence, that's your sword. Your slow pace, that's your armor. Your detachment, that's your final act. Not of revenge, but of arrival. They expect your comeback to follow a script they can understand, rising from the ashes in a spectacle burning just bright enough to burn out again. They've been conditioned to believe that growth is noisy and that healing requires applause. So when you didn't show them your wounds, when you didn't narrate your recovery in real time, when your triumphs came dressed in silence instead of sparkles, it confused them. You didn't break the way they rehearsed. You didn't rise with fireworks. You rose with shadows, slowly, cleanly, and what unfolds quietly cannot be predicted. What cannot be predicted cannot be labeled, and what cannot be labeled terrifies them. They expect easy breakdowns. You were supposed to unravel dramatically, cry on cue, reach out, make a scene, fall apart in public just enough to confirm the image they painted of you. They needed your collapse to justify their cowardice. Your suffering was meant to validate their decisions. It would have allowed them to keep spinning their version of the story. How they tried, how you failed, how they had no choice. But instead you disappeared, not into despair, but into discipline, into structure, into solitude that sharpened you. You didn't broadcast your bleeding. You bled behind curtains and came back cleaner, colder, unreadable. That wasn't part of the script. You left the performance entirely. And now they watch something unfold that they can't even begin to classify. They expected predictable motives. You would fight to get them back, or fight to be right, or fight to be heard, but you didn't fight at all. You simply stopped showing up. You stopped responding. You stopped seeking. And in that retreat, you found power. Power they can't trace. Power they don't understand. They don't know if your silence is forgiveness or fury. They don't know if you're moving on or plotting something. The truth is, you're doing neither. You're just becoming. And that becoming, with no road signs and no narrative, disrupts them. Because their mind wants a label: hurt, angry, obsessed. But your energy refuses all of them. So now, they fear what they can't name. The mind, when it encounters the unfamiliar, spirals. It reaches for labels to reduce the complexity into bite-sized safety. That's what they try to do with you now. They've changed. They're acting weird. They must be hiding something. They try to force their own discomfort into categories they can control. But you've gone category-less. You've stepped out of the behavioral algorithms they rely on to manipulate others. You are no longer a pattern. You are no longer a type. You've become a field of energy they can't touch. And that distance feels like abandonment to someone who was never meant to own you in the first place. They scroll through your presence like forensic analysts, looking for glitches, a flicker of pain, a post that says, "I'm not okay," but it never comes. What comes instead is something subtler, something they can't process. Stillness, movement without noise, growth without revenge. You didn't become a better version of yourself to spite them. You became it because you remembered who you were before they ever convinced you to shrink. That kind of clarity does not leave clues. It radiates, and they feel it now. Even in your absence, you are undeniable. And that energy, detached from drama, untethered to explanation, becomes a mirror to their own stagnancy. They look at you and realize they've been walking in circles. They're used to chaos because chaos is predictable. It follows rules. People break, cry, scream, beg, and then forgive. Repeat. It's a formula. But your silence broke the loop. Your evolution has no rhythm they can follow. You're not doing what wounded people are supposed to do. You're not reacting. You're not explaining, you're not engaging, you're simply expanding. And in that expansion, you've become incomprehensible to them. They don't hate you for moving on, they fear you for becoming something that no longer responds to their gravity. You've stopped orbiting, and now they're left alone in a system that once revolved around controlling you. Psychologically, unpredictability signals danger to a manipulative mind, because power, to them, is rooted in preemption. If they can predict you, they can prepare for you. But now, every time they think they know what you'll do, you do nothing. Every time they think you'll flinch, you inhale. Every time they think you'll return, you root deeper in your solitude. You've become a storm cloud that never rains, a fire that doesn't burn, a silence that screams. You are operating on a frequency they never learned how to listen to. So they call you strange. They say you've changed. But what they really mean is, you no longer serve my control. You didn't do it to confuse them, you did it to survive, to rise, to breathe again. Your evolution was never about them, it just exposed them. That's the real wound, not that you left, but that your growth pointed out everything they chose not to become. That's why they still watch, not with longing, but with fear. Because you've become something that forces accountability just by existing. You don't ask them to change, you just show them what happens when someone finally does. And that contrast, that undeniable truth makes them feel small in ways they can't articulate. So they project, they mock, but they never stop watching. Some realities are too internal to be seen, yet too powerful to be ignored. That's what unnerves them most about you. You didn't have to announce your transformation. You didn't walk around preaching about boundaries or healing or self-respect. You simply became quieter, more precise, less available to nonsense. And somehow, in your silence, in the weight of your withdrawn energy, they felt it, like a tremor beneath the surface of their comfortable lies. You never needed to explain your pain. It was encoded in your absence, in the way you stopped answering questions that were never asked, in good faith. You built a cathedral inside yourself and didn't invite them in. And now, they wander the periphery, hoping to catch a glimpse of the altar they'll never touch again. They never heard the screams in your head, but they feel the echo now. That's the thing about deep internal work. It rarely has an audience, but its aftershocks cannot be contained. They assumed your stillness was stagnation. They saw your quiet and called it weakness. But what they missed was the eruption happening behind your eyes. You were burning old selves in the basement of your soul, shedding layers too toxic to keep, confronting memories they would have drowned in. While they laughed in public, you died in private. And that quiet death, it gave birth to a version of you they cannot dismiss. Now they flinch, not because you speak, but because you don't. You are calm in a way that can only be earned, and they feel that gravity every time you enter a room without needing to dominate it. You carry an internal universe now, not loud, not performative, but undeniable. It pulses in your presence, in the way you look at people, like you've already seen their endgame, in the way you no longer react to triggers you once bled for. You're not healed, because healing is not a destination. You're aware, and that awareness is a power they can't trace. You read people without needing their words. You detach without announcing it. You discern motives before they bloom. That kind of internal mastery makes you dangerous, not because you harm others, but because you cannot be harmed in the same ways anymore. They sense it, and sensing what they can't define, that makes their skin crawl. They want proof. They want receipts. They want to know how, when, why you changed. But they'll never get it, because some realities are not performative. They are encrypted. You didn't post your pain, you sat in it. You didn't parade your wins, you buried them in your bones and let them sharpen your walk. You are an archive of silent revolutions, each one stitched together by moments no one clapped for. They thought they broke you when you went quiet. But in that quiet, you wrote scriptures of self-trust. Now, your intuition is your compass, and your solitude is your sanctuary. They still talk, you still build. That contrast grows louder with time. They used to say you've changed like it was a betrayal. What they meant was you stopped being predictable. You stopped being accessible to the same games. You stopped translating your depth for shallow minds, and in doing so you became unreadable. Some realities are too sacred to be decoded. You feel too much to be small. You see too clearly to be manipulated. They sense that now. They sense that everything about you is calculated, calm, deliberate. Your boundaries are no longer statements. They are atmosphere. You do not need to argue your worth. You exist in a frequency that silences those who once thought they could speak over you. They tell others, you became cold, but you didn't. You became selective. You realized that not everyone deserves a front row seat to your evolution, and that boundary shook them, because they used to be able to bait you with guilt, with shame, with silence. But now they throw their tactics and they bounce off your awareness like rubber darts. You're not angry, you're finished, and that difference is subtle but seismic. They can't provoke you because you no longer exist in the arena where they hunt. You moved beyond the battlefield into a world of your own design. Psychologically, internal transformation is the most disorienting kind. It changes the landscape of interaction without changing the surface of behavior. You still smile, still nod, still engage when needed, but they feel the shift. You've withdrawn your energy from people who drain it. You've reclaimed your narrative from those who rewrote it. You've become sovereign inside, and internal sovereignty is terrifying to external manipulators. Because they can't trace the lines anymore, they can't find the weakness. You've sealed the leaks in your soul, and now they're left speaking to a version of you that no longer resides in the room. You're not the same, and that's the point. You outgrew the story they kept rewriting. You evolved beyond the version of you that tolerated confusion as love, chaos as passion, silence as depth. Now, your peace speaks in volumes they can't comprehend. They watch you now not because they care, but because your detachment forces them to question everything they thought was true about you. And that internal reality you carry, it is undeniable. It reshapes the air, it changes the mood. It tells them, without words, that you saw everything, remembered everything, and chose yourself